Give me a little greens up. Okay, there we go. All right, just a reminder, we're at the April Community Food Projects Community of Practice Call. This is a partnership between the Food Systems Leadership Network and the Institute for Social and Economic Development Solutions. ISED, our partners, are the recipients of that National Training and Technical Assistance Grant and providers of applicant and grantee technical assistance. So anybody that's in this call, if you're thinking about applying for a CFP grant this year, the partners, Andy and Emma and others at ISED are really great resources as you put together your plans for your proposals this year. And for folks who are active grantees, I'm sure you're already familiar with the different resources and support that they provide. And then the Food Systems Leadership Network, for our part, we are co-hosting this community of practice. But then we also offer a lot of other opportunities, our mentorship program, our different communities of practice. We have workshops and conference that we're doing in partnership with ISED next year in our partnership. Okay, let's just hear a couple of um, upcoming trainings and opportunities. Emma, do you want to speak to this mutual aid training that's happening tomorrow?
Yeah, sure. So IACD has organized and is hosting a training on mutual aid. It's a two-part training. So part one is tomorrow. Um, and it's from 1 to 2:15 Central Time. I'm in Chicago, so 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And so I encourage you to register for that. I'm going to drop in the chat the registration for that, as well as a registration for a conference that was shared with me over email of one of our registrants for this. So this is a conference happening in California. So if any of you are in California, so register for our training tomorrow and consider whether or not you're a West Coast person if you want to attend this conference. So I'm putting both things in the chat.
Nice, thanks. And the other thing that we have coming up in the next couple of weeks is the FSLN hosts a seasonal harvest hour that's kind of like a happy hour, basically a time for us to connect with each other, share what's moving and shaking in the network. And our new team members, Alyssa and Chelsea Jackson, who's not able to be here today, but Alyssa and Chelsea will be co-hosting that harvest hour, and that is on Wednesday, May 13th. So come get to know them, meet them, find out other things that are moving and shaking in the Food Systems Leadership Network on Wednesday, May 13th. Anybody else in the community practice have announcements, things you have going on, things you want to share with other folks in the community? You can unmute and share them now, or you can drop them in the chat, including if you have any great news, like was your organization featured in the news recently? Is there something to celebrate? Let us know. Share it, celebrate it, drop it in the chat, or unmute and share. We'll just give a second for that.
Hi, I'd like
Yeah,
to share
oh,
something.
go ahead.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
it's all right. Let's stack Nan and then Liz.
Okay. I am in rural Western Pennsylvania, in the middle of a food desert. And I will be traveling thanks to a HFFI technical assistance grant. I'll be traveling to Sacramento in May for the food access conference that's going on there. So if there's anybody in the Sacramento area that would like to meet or share or any of those things, please drop it in the chat. I'd love to do that while I'm out there. That's the week of May 17th, I believe.
Awesome. Thanks, Nan. So real clear ask for connections in the Sacramento area and anybody else that might be going to the food access conference out there. Thanks, Nan. Hi, Liz.
Hey, y'all. How are you all doing?
Good. So glad
I'm
you're
Liz
here.
Ogilvy, and I'm in Springfield, Massachusetts. We're the poorest city and the richest state in the country. And half of our residents receive SNAP, and are very dependent upon it. Many of them are losing it because our state has a really high error rate, and it has been accused of lots of fraud. And so we just had a really cool thing happen. I spoke at some conference to motivate students to get involved, college students to get involved in communities. And one of the students who attended had a cousin who's studying real estate finance at NYU. And the short story is he got inspired by my saying I had a dream of building a food hub. And he went back to NYU and assembled a case study competition. And yesterday, five brilliant cohorts of students presented these proposed models for a food hub on a parcel of land that I've been trying to get the city to put out in an RFP for agricultural or food use. And these, first of all, I wouldn't get a job if I was trying to get one now as a person fresh out of undergrad, because kids are brilliant. So I'm telling you this to say, do not miss the opportunities that exist within universities and colleges around you. Don't just get interns to do grunt work. Think outside of the box because they put together proposals. There were three real estate consulting firms on the webinar who said they would give any one of them a summer internship. These proposals were put together so well. And the city sent me a message this morning saying they were working on the RFP and were going to shape it so that respondents would only come back with plans for food and ag use. And in the
Wow.
midst of all this memory, it makes me say to you, yeah, we're struggling and we're surviving, and don't stop dreaming. Don't stop thinking big for your communities. And because I think even the most disengaged bureaucrats at cities really want to see something good, right? I use
Mm.
them as an extreme, and we know there are amazing people working in city government. But I tell you that story because it gave me such a boost of encouragement. I had not seen any of the presentations, and I was totally blown away. Like it was, I bet it was a good $60,000 worth of work that they did for us. So that's my, and if anybody's coming to Massachusetts, call me up because I love a new friend.
That is amazing. And thank you so much for sharing that story. That's, exactly the kind of thing that we want to lift up in this part at the beginning of these calls. So really appreciate both you and Nan, let your voice be heard and asking for what you're looking for and also offering sparks of light like you just did, Liz, and great ideas and inspiration. So thank you so much. I think that's a great shift over to Alyssa, who's going to reground us in the FSLN community of practice, our cultural agreements, before we get going in our topic for the day. So, Alyssa, I will kick it over to you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I feel like it is such a perfect segue. I'm really excited to be here for the first time. And, these cultural agreements have been around for a bit. So if you've been in one of these spaces before, you may have seen them. But one of the things that some of what you're talking about reminds me of is this first one here around celebrating our collective wisdom. And, so everyone here is bringing their own experience to the table. And a lot of different voices together. We know a lot. So a lot of our experiences together, we can do amazing things. I also wanted to highlight this, meeting people where they are, meeting each other where we are, and speaking from our own experiences, particularly as we kind of engage in this conversation around micro aggregation. You might be knee deep in it, trying to figure it out. You may have been doing it for a while, or this might be the first time you've ever heard about it. So, just really, really just wanting to lift up these agreements. They've held us in the FSLN group and partners really well, and just highlight a few of them as we kind of march into this discussion of innovation. Some people have been doing for a long, long time, and others are just learning. Um, I am also just wanting to encourage folks to come on camera. It's really fun to connect as human beings in this space and see each other in real life. And also just want to remind folks that when you're not talking to stay on mute so we can hear each other really well. Today, we're not going to be doing breakouts. We're going to be doing a group discussion. So we'll lead you through that at the end, and you can kind of participate in that either through the chat or just like we did coming off mute. We are recording this content and we will be able to share this out, so just, want to appreciate everyone that was able to shift to this week and also make this available for folks that weren't. And now I'm actually going to hand it back to Susan, who's going to help us kind of set this context a little bit, how we came to this this topic for today. and how it fits into this framework around the community food projects work.
Thanks, Alyssa. Yeah, a few weeks ago, somebody up in Arkansas had reached out, and there had been another email or two over the last number of months where folks were asking, like, are there examples out there where people are working with a handful of hyper small scale producers to help them get market access and at the same time increasing access to, healthy, culturally appropriate food in communities? And I was like, I know of a couple of examples, but I really felt like a really good topic for one of these community food projects, community practice calls, especially given the purpose of the USDA Community Food Projects Grant Program. The overall program is fundamentally about building resilient local food systems that meet the needs of local communities, and especially for people experiencing food insecurity. The program, yeah, thanks, Nancy, and your comment here is like having your job thanks to a NIFA grant. It's a really important program. It's a very small but mighty program that has been the the catalyst for a lot of really amazing community food work across the country. And while it's small, it has been a catalytic investment. There's been a lot of creative work that's happened as a result of these CFP grants. Another, really important point is how the program, and I think, just all of us in general, are committed to prioritizing community-based, self-reliant approaches that strengthen long-term food security and not just short-term food access. So really trying to build more food sovereignty and self-reliance in community, and not just projects that might have, a more short-term impact. It's also explicitly about supporting linking producers to markets and increasing the viability of small to mid-scale farms. So just going to the next slide, just want to pull these like verbatim from the website. Two of the long-term goals that are, on the USDA NIFA Community Food Projects Grant site are, again, increasing self-reliance of communities and providing for the food needs of the community, and creating innovative marketing projects and activities that mutually benefit producers and income eligible consumers. So what we're talking about today is really right at the heart of the program's purpose. Practical community rooted ways to strengthen both food access and farmer viability at the same time. Um, Micro aggregation models are a way to do that, to expand market access for very small producers who can't meet volume or consistency demands, while also increasing variety and reliability for communities, especially in underserved areas. They can create a middle ground between going it alone. So for a producer who's maybe just getting up and running, maybe just starting their business, may have a very small scale operation. It can help them to, get moving with their business without scaling up too fast. And also allow producers to stay small and place-based while reaching more people without needing like major infrastructure investments or capital investment, major infrastructure, et cetera. Um, so, just kind of framing this up before we hear a couple of different models and then draw from you guys and what are you seeing, experiencing your communities. We acknowledge that there's a tension and that there are many producers who are operating at a very small scale, very limited capacity in terms of labor, volume, consistency, and it's hard for them to access larger, stable markets as an individual. They may not have enough to warrant having their own farmers market table, paying the feeds for that, getting all of the, the tent and all of the pieces that, can cost hundreds, if not thousands of dollars to be prepared for. Acknowledging that, a lot of folks aren't quite ready to do that. And many of the smallest producers beginning farmers, BIPOC producers, in some cases, access. So micro aggregation models can lower barriers to entry to those markets, create more culturally relevant and diverse food options, and keep value circulating in communities. Um, just grounding in our current context in this conversation is just acknowledging also that we are experiencing a period and a sustained period of supply chain disruptions, market volatility, rising input costs, rising food costs, uncertain policy and funding landscapes. So micro aggregation models can build more distributed, flexible networks that can adapt quickly. So, for example, if one farm is having a bad week, another can fill in. When market shifts, these kinds of, kind of decentralized models can pivot and adapt quickly. And that is food resilience. That is community resilience. That is self-reliance of being able to adapt and move quickly. So today's session is about lifting up these kinds of innovations and solutions that use small scale aggregation and shared market strategies as emerging solutions while also acknowledging and exploring the challenges that these kinds of models present around coordination, pricing, logistics, dozens of variations in this work already happening. So we want to surface those today. So I am going to pass it over here to Alyssa first, or sorry, to Emma first, who is going to share some of the like farmer and CSA aggregation models that she's personally experienced. Then going to hear from Alyssa, who's also going to share from their own experience and lift up some of the models that they've worked with. And then we're going to open up for some discussion and sharing and crowdsourcing what's going on in your communities. So over to you, Emma.
Thank you. And I want to apologize. My internet is being a little weird. So if I freeze, I'm sorry about that. So my background is in farming. I am one of the TA providers for the CFP grant, but I come from an agricultural background kind of primarily. So I ran my own CSA. I've worked on a number of farms. I worked for a small local food hub as well. And predominantly in Vermont, which is a very agriculturally heavy state. There's about 7,000 farms in Vermont. And I would say the majority of those farms are small scale, so small that on the USDA definition, they don't even reach the $300,000 gross income that's considered small. So, yeah, they're very, very micro. You could almost call them market garden size, many of them. So, as a lot of you probably are aware, if you are farmers or you're working with farmers, farmers are kind of pushed to diversify constantly to grow a wide array of things, which is really difficult to do. So, some farms have the capacity to administrate and organize something like a CSA. I'm going to talk about that first. But they have issues, whether with their soil, their microclimate, or just the labor issues, growing every single thing that customers at this point are expecting from a CSA share. And then there may be another farm that is also very small scale, but doesn't have the infrastructure, doesn't have the administrative capacity to organize something like a CSA, which having organized one myself is a lot of administrative work, a lot of emailing and tracking and showing up on the distribution day and those kinds of things. So there's a really kind of helpful relationship between that CSA organizing farm and the non-CSA organizing farm. The pro for the CSA farm is that if there is a gap in their product, something they can't grow, or maybe something happens that takes out a crop, they can ask another producer to directly deliver to them. The non-CSA farm, the benefit is that they get access to this market. CSAs are becoming very popular, and they get to be a part of that. Um, I know for myself, when I was organizing a CSA, we experienced issues with climate change. There was flooding, which is very popular in Vermont right now. Kind of every year, there's a period of flooding. So there were crops that we would lose. And then there might be another farm that did not experience that same flooding. So being able to work with them and collaborate with them lifted an incredible emotional and practical burden. I know another farm that I have worked with that, they had a disease take out all of their winter crop or their winter squash one year, which was a huge crop for them, and they were able to bring it in from another farm. So in that way, as Susan mentioned, it really builds resiliency when farms work together like that. Um, and stability for a farm in a sector that is incredibly unstable just by nature of the weather and the markets and all the things that make it kind of a difficult thing to navigate. So the other thing I'll talk about is farm stands. So when I worked for this food hub, we did a lot of delivering to farm stands. And I think sort of starting, a lot of farms already had farm stands, but starting in COVID times, sort of 2020 to 2022, many of them saw the demand for farm stands really go up kind of exponentially. I spoke to one farmer that said they'd seen a 70% increase in sales at their farm stand. And so those farm stands sort of became like mini grocery stores in a way, or retail style food hubs. And while they would stock a lot of their own product in those farm stands, they couldn't do it all. So they would work with a small producer again to bring in things that they couldn't grow themselves, didn't want to grow themselves. And those small producers that would deliver directly to them might be at a scale that a food hub, a traditional food hub, is not wanting to work with. It's not worth their time to pick up. The food hub I worked with was quite small, but it's difficult for us to drive all the way out into the boonies to pick up a box of lettuce. That's not always going to make sense, but that producer might be able to deliver to this farm stand. Um, so I know that post 2020 sales have gone down a little bit with farm stands, but the producers I know are still using this as a really viable model. I think in part because it's another income stream for them, but also because it's now supporting businesses, other farms that are relying on that as well. And these farm stands have become like little hubs. And that's an important market for the producers now. Um, and I also want to call out, which I think Alyssa might talk a little bit more about. I've seen a lot of examples of pay what you can farm stands that are a little bit more of like a nonprofit model. They're getting grant funding so that they can buy actual product from producers at a fair price, but then the stand itself is not costing very much money for people. There's one in Vermont called the Retreat Farm, Pay What You Can stand that has been going for many years, and it's right on a very like well-traveled road. It's walking distance from the main town, and I think that they have a lot of success with people really coming and like turning over the product that's in there. So these are just some kind of anecdotal examples from my experience as a producer and the resiliency that I found buying in from some other producers, and then just conversations I have had with producers around a state that is predominantly these like extremely small scale, community-based farms. And I'm happy and excited to hear the examples that you have. So much is learned from conversations. When I go to a farm stand, I'm always finding the farmer to like chat with them. So I'm sure many of you have had a lot of conversations on farm with people of ways that they are building more resiliency into their purchasing and selling models. So I'm going to pass it now to Alyssa to talk about another aspect of this.
Yeah, thanks so much, Emma, for it's fun. I'm coming here as kind of facilitator and training, but in my previous work, I helped lead farmers markets and farm stands in Philadelphia. So it's nice to be able to kind of participate in this and bring that knowledge with me. And I'm also really excited to hear what else is going on in your all's neck of the woods. So these are just a few models that kind of emerged through the work that I was previously engaged in. One of them was around kind of creating food access through farm stands. And so we had shifted the language from farmers market to farm stand because what was realized was it really wasn't, it was a low volume market and it really was enough revenue to support one farmer's livelihood. It certainly wasn't enough to support many. And so while we wanted to make sure that the farm stand had a really robust offering, kind of like what Emma was talking about, someone showing up and wanting to get a bunch of different produce. It was really clear that it really needed to be coming from one set of staff that are there and support, the labor and transportation rather than many. And so one way that we saw that is kind of having a lead farmer who actually built out their own aggregation network. So, a lot of this is relational and would build out kind of partnerships with different growers in the area. And they were then able to offer a wide variety of items and that benefited so that the folks that were coming to the farm stand really appreciated the wide offerings and were able to get what they were, wanting to purchase in that season. The other thing, to remember too is a lot of the redemptions or, a lot of the currencies that were spent at those farm stands were FMP vouchers. So someone might be coming with $30 in produce. They really want to be able to get a number of different things that they can be excited about and bring home to make and eat. So that was one thing I wanted to kind of talk about. The other thing, that we often saw was around youth farm stands, or sometimes we saw this with urban farms as well, where the yield is, when you don't have a lot of crops, the yield can be smaller. And there also can be gaps depending on the type of year and what's coming out of the ground. And so this idea of starting with what was harvested there and then building out from there. So in this case, we started with the list of everything that was going to be ready for that week's farm stand. And then we used out the offerings. And so that's just a little bit of a switch of starting with the inventory of what's uber local to support those kind of youth farm stands or the smaller grower. And then kind of building out from there. We have a number, I'm in Philadelphia, there's a number of different versions of that, which again kind of get to the same goal, right? Where, there's a nice offering of things. It takes some of the pressure and allows that natural ebb and flow for some of the growers. The other thing just to note, Emma talked a bit about weather and climate, but also some crops they need more space. So particularly in an urban environment or micro, where you're really working in a small amount of land, some things like melons, corn, or orchard fruit just might not be crops that are easy, but those are things that folks expect when they're coming to a summer warm weather farm stand and they want to see. They're kind of the crowd pleasers. So it really supports that partnership between the larger farms or even small farms in the large agricultural space, but in this case is a little bigger than the micro farms we might see. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was these kind of open invitations. So we know if you've been to a really busy kind of weekend market at a farmer's market, the space is in high demand. But if and when there's space at that market that can be kind of earmarked for smaller growers and producers to come when they have something to sell. A really good example of this was we had a youth farm stand that we worked with. They had Asian pear trees that would kind of ripen once a year, and they would have a big crop of Asian pears. And they would do a lot of herbs. And so while they definitely did not feel like they had the capacity to sign on to be weekly vendors or the crops to support that, they wanted an outlet for when their things were ready to go. And so this kind of come when you can, sell when you can, and when you have inventory. Obviously, that's not going to work for everyone, but in a very established, well-trafficked, high-volume market that can just carve out a little space for small producers. It's just one way to kind of keep that door open and create an opportunity without the burden and overhead that comes with the ongoing responsibility of a farm stand. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that have come across, my work as I was in the farmers market farm stand world, and we want to hear from you now. So I'm gonna hand it back to Susan to kind of start a little bit of a group discussion around, what you all have seen in your work.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna maybe just copy these questions into the chat so we can take the slides down and just see each other and have some conversation. But really just wanting to start with, we just heard about a couple of models. What else do you know about out there? So what other examples are you seeing in your communities or do you know of that are within, our country or abroad that we could learn from? And would love to, you could raise your hand so we can kind of manage who's speaking when, but would love to hear a couple voices. What are some other examples that you're aware of or models that you know of, and the innovations and strategies that are emerging? Let's start there, and then we can get into talking about the challenges and some of the barriers to these